Okay, so welcome to another video. In this one, I just wanted to talk a little bit about open source. It's one of those questions that people ask a lot. How do I get involved in open source? Should I do open source? What even is open source? What do I do as a contributor to open source? So, off the bat, I think open source is a very valuable way to get decent experience as a developer, especially a junior developer, someone who's willing to learn. So open source is, I don't know the definition off the top of my head, but my interpretation of it is code that is developed in public, it's accessible, you can see everything, and it is open to contributors from the public. So anyone can come along and pull the code source to their local machine, make some changes, work on an issue, and then make a pull request with those changes. And if they're accepted, then they'll be integrated into that code. So it's a way for, well, it's outsourcing and open sourcing the development of software to absolutely anyone. So anyone can see it and anyone can change it. And they're usually, they're maintained by a core group that establish the terms, conditions, policy, procedures, all that kind of stuff around how to contribute and work on and use this code. And oftentimes open source is going to be under some kind of license. Usually you'll see the MIT license, which has some terms and conditions around how you can use that code. But yeah, they're generally for good projects that anyone can work on. And that means that you can use these to your advantage to kind of tick off two boxes. You get some experience and you also get to help the code base. And, you may find something that's in an area that's of interest to you, that speaks close to your heart, for example. Or just a topic that you find really interesting that you'd like to learn more about and work in, which is a great way for you to also give back to that. So open source, there's tons of projects out there. However, it can be challenging to find one that you're interested in, that is active, and that is relatively easy to kind of get established locally, so it's running properly, and so that you can understand what the code base is doing enough that you can then go in, pick up an issue, and make changes. That's probably the hardest part, especially as a junior or someone who's new to coding, is even just finding your way around. And there's probably some good YouTube videos on how to get into open source and just like this one, really. But how to find your way around these projects. I'm not going to give too many pointers on how to find projects. I think just from the perspective of myself and Ruby on Rails, I think Ruby for Good is an organization, nonprofit, that runs these kinds of projects, and they have multiple open source projects on the go right now. I think they're a good place to check, but just scour GitHub and the web, and there's lots of open source kind of repository, meaning not GitHub repositories, but more like there's websites out there that list a ton of open source projects, though they're not always up to date. So you've got to do a little bit of fishing around Network, Reddit, YouTube, Google, all those kinds of things to find a project that you are interested in. And then once you find a project, you've got to spend some time, depending on your proficiency of your coding level. You're probably going to have to spend a fair bit of time investing in understanding what this project is, what it's about, the technologies that it's using, and just getting it set up. So if it's a decent project, there should be enough description in the README that you can go onto a repository and get this thing installed locally, providing that you follow all the steps and you've installed all the dependencies. You should be able to then get it running and have that local instance of that code running on your machine. And then once you've got to that point, well, then you can play around with the interface and understand how the application works. Many times there's lots of different user roles. You want to try out each of those user roles and try out all the functionality within the UI, just so you have an idea of how the app works. And then once you've done that, you can go in and start looking at the code and understand how that makes the UI work. And once you're comfortable with kind of the general structure of the code base and the application, its functionality, you can go into, usually if it's on GitHub, you can go into an issues tab. And within the issues tab, you'll find, depending on how active the project is, you'll find a list of issues, sometimes many, sometimes few. And these issues can be created by the maintainers, but also other contributors. And I think any member of the public can actually create an issue. So usually issues are just something where it's a catch-all term for obviously bugs and things that need to be fixing that are issues, but also developing new features and building the application out as well will be scoped under this issues tab. And you'll go in there and you'll find an issue that is something that you think you might be able to do in a timely manner. And usually you'll go in and see if anyone else has picked up that issue, and there's usually a comments history there that will let you know. And if nobody has picked it up, or if it's open for, sometimes people pick it up and they can't do it, and then it goes back on the market. So it's open. You'll usually leave a comment saying, hey, can I pick this up? And one of the maintainers will assign it to you. Then you can go in and locally in your development environment, start making the changes to address that issue and get it working as it should be. There's a whole range of things you could be doing, but usually for some examples is you might be making a UI change. So you'll be making changes in the code, looking at your screen and the browser to see that the changes are reflected properly. Then you're also going to want to run the test suite, assuming that there is one, and write tests for your changes as well. And then you're going to, once you're happy, you're probably going to have to lint your code just to make sure that it's formatted properly. And then you're going to make a pull request. And usually you're working off of a fork. So you fork the repository for the open source project. So you have a local fork in your GitHub, and then you're going to be working from that. And you're going to create feature branches on your own fork. And then you're going to be syncing that, your fork main branch with the upstream main branch periodically to make sure you're getting all the other code changes in. And then you're going to be syncing that with your feature branches as well. And once you're happy with your code and the tests are passing, then you're going to make a pull request. And that is kind of the big moment. That's when you are asking the maintainers of the upstream repository to review your code. And if they're happy, then they're going to integrate your code into the main branch on the main project. And that whole process that I've just explained there, it's the common process for open source, but it's also the common process on whatever repository you're working in, whether it's open source, your own repositories without forking them, or work professionally, right? So that's the great thing about open source projects, is it is a flavor or taste of real world development. And if you can contribute to open source and you understand the workflows, working with version control, writing good pull request descriptions, making code changes, making sure tests pass, writing tests for your code, these kinds of things are expected or vital within the professional world of development. So open source is a great way to prime yourself to understand how professional development works, understanding the workflows. And if you can show that, then an employer is going to be far more or far less hesitant, far more open to perhaps giving you a job, knowing that you understand these processes and they don't have to teach them to you. So that's the other really big benefit of open source, is getting a real world flavor of or taste of development. And depending on the project, you might also be able to get support as well. So I know in the Ruby for Good projects, for example, they have office hours and open hours, I guess they call open office hours, where depending on the project, it could be weekly or bi-weekly, where you might have some maintainers or leads of the project available on Zoom, and you can join them, you can ask questions, you can get verification on things, and you can even do some pair coding just to help you along your way. And you can also do that asynchronously on GitHub through the issues, perhaps asking questions through there on an issue that you've picked up. So that's also very much like working professionally. There are obviously differences. Working professionally is going to be expectations that you're there for, I don't know, 8 hours a day or whatever it may be, that you are communicating a lot more frequently and committing probably more code and working on more issues for more time, obviously, per week. However, 5 hours spent on open source is going to be very similar to 5 hours spent at work, at least in my experience. So definitely recommend doing open source if you're looking to bolster your resume and understand what development is like in the real world. And you can also, the great thing about that is it's a way to contribute code to an actual production application. That's one thing I'd make sure is that the project you're working on is actually being used in production. It's not just, code that just sits there as a toy, so to speak, and never gets used in the real world. I think it would be great to know that your code's going to add value in the real world. And you can also show that on your resume or talk about that in an interview. You may get asked questions about what you've done in open source, and you can actually go in and say, oh, I've built this feature, and you can show a website and explain the issue or the challenge that your code solved and how that helps add value. These are all really important things, I think, to be able to demonstrate. And lastly, if you can't find a good open source project and you really want to commit to open source, you could always create your own. Now, this is the long road. This is not an easy road to go, but that's exactly what I ended up doing. I worked a little bit on open source with Ruby for Good on some of their other projects. And then while I was doing the Odin project, I took the Ruby on Rails path. And for the final project on that, I've explained in my other videos, but I really wanted to build something with real world value, with real users. I didn't want to just build a toy app that sits in a repo and on my machine here and never gets used by anyone. So I built a small application in Ruby on Rails for a dog adoption organization in Mexico to just help facilitate that dog adoption process and make it easier. And I spent, a lot of time, like 3 months full-time building this thing to get to an MVP. And then over the next, say, 8 months since its launch, brings us to today, just slowly building out features and taking contributions from other developers from the Odin project who wanted to get involved in open source. So in a way, I created my own mini open source project, which helped. I also leveraged collaboration and contributions from other developers, which helped build this thing out more than what I could do myself, because obviously multiple minds make lighter work of a big problem that you're trying to solve. So that project has been, at least from my perspective, really successful. In the 8 months that it's been running, I think it's had almost 60 dog adoptions run through it, which is great. That my goal was just one adoption, so to have 60 is really gratifying. But at the same time, because it's been successful and has added value and it's been demonstrable, that project has helped me get my first internship. And I think that internship then really helped me, along with my kind of passion for this project, helped me get my full-time job that I'm in now as a Ruby on Rails developer. So I think going that extra step really helped there. And on this vein of creating your own open source project, it's not for everyone. It is a lot of work to come up with an idea and see it through to an MVP. But it is possible because I did it, and I'm not the world's best programmer. Like, I know that. The thing is that I solve problems, and that's what programmers need to do. I'm certainly not the fastest, nor am I the most technical, but I take a problem and I solve it. And I'm very good at working with other people as well and communicating, so that I think I'm an enjoyable person to work with. Maybe not a rocket or ace, but someone who is reliable, dependable, and gets the job done. And I think if you have those skill set or that skill set and those characteristics, developing your own open source project is a really good idea, I think, especially in today's market where it's very tough to stand out. And the icing on the cake for me was that Ruby for Good actually picked up this dog adoption project and has now integrated it into their core projects. So they now have a pet rescue open source project that is this weekend was their conference where they really sort of blitzed on it to explore where it should go and to get certain features working. And the goal there is now to have a multi-tenanted application that thousands, if they wanted to, but multiple dog adoption or pet adoption and fostering organizations can now join up to for free and have a bespoke kind of domain specific solution to their problems that will help them with tracking pets, tracking their data, their vaccinations and medical history, to take on or create or allow for creation of users of different types, whether it's staff or people who are interested in fostering or adopting pets, and then providing functionality to allow for fostering and adoptions within the system, and sending reminders and updates to people who have adopted for their pet. Make sure they get the vaccinations, all these kinds of things. So it just takes the whole dog or pet fostering and adoption process and has created an application or piece of software that helps make that whole process much simpler and smoother. And where this project is going is far greater and further than I could ever take it alone. But I saw a lot of potential in what I built, and I approached Ruby for Good and said, "Hey, are you looking at taking on another project? Because I got this code base that I think is a great start, a great platform for you to take on and run away with." And they said yes. They took it on. So I'm so happy to see the progress on this project now. And you can go and check it out at the Ruby for Good. If you just type in Ruby for Good GitHub, you'll go to their page and you'll see all of their projects and repositories, and it's called Pet Rescue. And the base code for that is my dog adoption application. None of this I thought was possible. None of this I ever thought I'd be able to do when I first started coding. And like I said, I am not the sharpest tool in the shed when it comes to technical problem solving. I hated math in school, though I did well in other subjects in science and things like that. I think you got to have a certain level of IQ, but you don't need to be, I think the average, like me, person can come along, learn to code, and make these things happen. The key thing is your characteristics and your work ethic and your ability to just keep going when things are not going your way so that you do find a problem. So yeah, that's kind of open source in a nutshell for me. It's a pretty long video, so I'll be surprised if anyone is still listening, but I just wanted to share my experience with open source, and hopefully it inspires somebody else to think, you know what, yeah, I could do something like that. Hopefully it inspires someone even just to go and look at other open source projects and get involved. And then if you're also inclined to even create your own project, and just know that as long as you create something with a little value in a domain that people care about, I think there's good chances that you're going to get other people who want to contribute to it. And the key thing here is none of it's for profit, none of it's for money. It's all about adding value to to a particular domain area that needs some help. So that's when you're going to get other people who want to give back, willing to contribute to these projects. Yeah, any questions that you have about open source, leave them below, because I'm sure there are a ton. Open source is not easy to get involved with, but once you kind of crack the nut and you start to understand how it works, I think there's tons of opportunity out there. And just go on there and start simple. Just make a pull request for an update on the README, for example. Something really simple like that. And good luck, in finding projects that you care about and making your first pull request. Let me know what your experiences are with open source below, what projects you've worked on, what you've liked, why you do it, and I'd be keen to know. Hello to whoever's watching. I'm just ending the video right there. So go and check it out on my channel in the live section if you wanted to catch up on what was talked about before. All right, thank you.